Will was born in a world full of magic, but he didn't have any magic skills. Despite this, he wanted to become the strongest magician by defeating all the monsters in the dungeon with his sword. He lived in a place where magic was highly valued, and even though he got into a top academy, people doubted how he could succeed without magic. To prove himself, he practiced his sword skills and regularly went into dangerous dungeons. He fought huge beasts that used magic against him, but he dodged their spells and cut them down effortlessly with his fast sword moves. After many battles, he knew he had to face even more monsters to survive. The next day, tired but determined, he went to class where Professor Edward taught them about alchemy and making explosives with sulfur. Edward noticed Will nodding off in the back of the class, so he called out his name. But Will, unaware of this, kept on snoring softly until Edward shouted his name loudly. Startled, Will jumped to his feet immediately. Edward asked Will to come to the front and demonstrate what they had just discussed. With no other option, Will nervously went up in front of the entire class. Edward told him it was very easy, all he had to do was produce flames, and sulfur would be created. Trembling, Will took out his wand and tried to conjure flames with a spell, but to his dismay, not even a tiny spark came out. The students burst into laughter, treating it like a comedy show, but Edward silenced them sternly. Edward looked at Will with disappointment, wondering aloud how someone so good in theory could fail so miserably in practice. He expressed disbelief at Will's lack of practical magic and questioned how he had even been accepted into the academy. Just then, a confident boy named Sheehan with red hair stepped forward. He effortlessly used his flame magic to burn the items on the desk, creating sulfur in the process. While Will shrank back, Edward warned Sheehan against using magic without his permission. Edward emphasized the importance of magic in their world, praising mages as heroes. He made it clear that to succeed at the academy, students needed to excel in magic. He criticized those who couldn't control magic, suggesting they should leave the academy if they couldn't keep up, indirectly telling Will to leave the academy. After class, Sheehan and his friends approached Will, mocking him for only being able to handle low-level dungeon monsters. Just then, Will's childhood friend Colette stepped in and defended him, telling Sheehan to back off because Will was much kinder than him and his gang. Sheehan brushed it off with a laugh, saying that kindness and hard work wouldn't get you far without magic, and then he walked away with his friends. Colette tried to comfort Will, telling him not to worry too much. But Will seemed accustomed to this bullying. He then looked up at the sky and admired its beauty. Years ago, humans lived under a darkness cast by evil spirits, fearing their shadow. Then, 5 legendary mages known as Magia Vanders bravely fought these spirits and liberated humanity, revealing the true sky once more. The title of Magia Vanders now belonged to the world's most powerful mages. Will recalled a promise he made with his childhood friend Elfaria, who used to show him storybooks about the Magia Vanders. They vowed to become Magia Vanders themselves someday. Elfaria fulfilled her promise, rising swiftly through the ranks with her incredible talent to become the youngest Magia Vander in history, residing in the Divine Tower. Meanwhile, Will struggled, barely clinging to their shared dream. Later that day, Will went to meet Professor Walkner, who got furious upon learning that Will had ventured alone into level 7 dungeons. Walkner yelled at him, warning that he could get himself killed one day. Will fell to the ground, apologizing, but he also asked if he would receive any credit for his efforts. Walkner sighed and reluctantly awarded him 2 credits. Will rejoiced, but Walkner then questioned if he still hadn't given up on becoming a Magia Vander. Walkner then explained that to even have a chance at becoming a Vander, Will needed to enter the Upper Institute, which required earning credits in writing, spell work, and combat. Without being able to use spells, Will wouldn't earn any spell work credits, making it impossible to qualify regardless of his performance in the other areas. Will asserted that he was determined to become a Magia Vander no matter what. Walkner reminded him that he first needed to graduate, informing him that he needed 4 more credits by the week's end to continue studying in this academy. This revelation shocked Will, who immediately set out to find monsters that could earn him those credits. Walkner mentioned a monster named Baskerville on the 6th floor that hadn't been defeated yet. Overjoyed, Will hugged his teacher. However, Sheehan overheard their conversation and decided to head to the dungeons himself to kill the monster before Will, hoping to get him expelled from the academy for lacking credits. Later that evening, Will entered the cave with his familiar Kiki, instructing her to use her keen sense of smell to locate the monster. However, Kiki seemed hesitant, remembering how she was burned by a Baskerville's breath during their last encounter. On the other hand, Sheehan and his friends also ventured into the 6th floor, determined to find the beast before Will to sabotage his chances. One of Sion's followers, with distinctive pink hair, questioned the wisdom of just 3 mages tackling the 6th floor. Sheehan angrily dismissed him, asserting his own skills and ordering them to use their scan magic to pinpoint the monster's location. Suddenly, a massive monster emerged and struck the spiky-haired boy so hard that he was flattened against the wall. Sheehan was left frozen in shock, unable to move, while the pink-haired follower screamed in terror. Will heard the scream and instantly jumped to his feet, running with lightning speed towards the noise, worried someone was hurt. Turning a corner, he found Sion on the ground, casting fire blasts at a monstrous creature known as the Sentinel. However, the monster seemed unfazed by the flames and continued advancing towards the terrified Sheehan. Recognizing the Sentinel as an incredibly strong monster worth 10 credit scores, Will wondered why it was in such a low-level dungeon. He realized Sheehan's magic was ineffective against the creature, which ignored the fire blasts aimed at it. Despite Sheehan bullying him in the past, Will hesitated about whether to help or not. Then he remembered Elfaria, who had always seen him as a kind person and had given him a pair of glasses as a gift. Putting on the glasses reminded Will of his true nature. As the monster raised its weapon to strike Sheehan down, Will intervened just in time, blocking the attack and forcing the monster away to save Sheehan's life. Meanwhile, back at the academy, Edward entered Walkner's room and urgently instructed him to send his familiar into the dungeons, telling him that Sheehan and his followers had entered the 6th floor without permission. Walkner understood the gravity of the situation but assured Edward not to worry, as Will was also on the same floor in the dungeon. Will clashed repeatedly with the monster, skillfully blocking its attacks and maneuvering around it. With a swift slash, he cut off one of the monster's fingers, enraging it further. The monster tried to strike back, but Will dodged effortlessly, moving with agility like an eagle in flight. He gets blasted back and then the monster throws rocks at him, but he cuts through them easily. He jumps around the monster and lands on its back, then stabs it through the neck. The monster starts flailing and Sheehan is shocked to see Will's abilities. Back at the academy, Edward is also shocked. Walkner says that Will is an outcast because he has no magical abilities, but he has super strength, toughness like a dwarf, and a brain that learns attack patterns just by looking once. They watch as Will slashes off the monster's arm and calmly walks to a giant sword on the ground. Will picks it up effortlessly. Walkner tells Edward that in a world of magic, Will is the only warrior. The monster shoots an energy beam, but Will blocks it with a giant sword and slashes the monster into pieces. Will then helps Sion, who looks shocked, while Edward screams that someone without magic can't surpass a magician and storms off. Walkner realizes that Edward can't accept reality. He knows Will's story will become legend, turning Wistoria into a place where swords and wands meet. After returning from the dungeon, Professor Walkner gets mad at Will, but then he awarded 10 credit points to him for defeating that monster. Then we see a scene 5 years earlier when Will, despite not having magic, gets admitted to the academy thanks to Alfaria's influence. The academy considers expelling Will due to his lack of magic, but Headmaster and Walkner intervenes. Impressed by Will's dispelling spells, using a dagger and his own strength, Walkner and Headmaster decide to allow Will to stay, despite objections from others. In an emotional moment, Will asks if he can reach the top of the tower by studying at the academy. The Headmaster responds, saying that, if Will works hard with courage and determination, he can achieve it. The scene then shifts to a classroom, where Professor Walkner is teaching students about becoming Magia Vander. First they have to reach the top of the tower, means gaining admission into the Upper Institute, which has 2 paths. Presenting unique magic spell, or collecting 7,200 credits. Most students struggle with the first path, leaving only the second option. Professor Walkner holds extra classes for those facing graduation problems. Will leaves the class and meets Colette, discussing how Professor Walkner sacrifices his valuable time for extra classes. Meanwhile, Professor Edward declines taking extra classes without thinking about it. In the hall, as Will and Colette advance, They notice Scion, informing all of his friends that he defeated the evil sentinel, the same monster Will fought and defeated. Sion's friends are telling everyone else about it, that, when we regained consciousness, we saw Sion had defeated that evil sentinel, and saved us all. Everyone praises Sion for this achievement, thinking he might soon become top tier. However, Sion knows the truth inside. He notices Will passing by angrily and grabs his collar, questioning him sarcastically about how someone like him managed to do such a thing without any talent. Despite his anger, Sion doesn't reveal the truth about defeating the Sentinel to everyone and leaves quietly. Colette asks Will if something happened among them, but Will denies it. Now, we see the headmaster's office, where Professor Edward requests that Will be expelled from the academy. Professor Edward is very serious about this matter. He says that someone who cannot use magic can still be so capable that they can surpass those who can use magic. How is this possible? The headmaster mentions Professor Edward's request, saying that Will is in his last year, his 6th year, nearing graduation, so it's not possible to expel him from the academy. Professor Edward insists that Will cannot use magic, and this academy is for warriors, not mages. The headmaster says that, if we overlook Will's inability to use magic, he excels in every other field so much that no one in the entire academy can match him. The goal of this academy is to provide good education to children, and in this regard, I will conduct an exam with Will. Since you've read about Will's secret, the responsibility for this test will be yours. You can do anything in this test. After this, it's up to you to decide what to do with Will. After Colette sees a sword in Will's locker, she tells him that he still hasn't changed. Will explains that he can't bring his sword to the classroom, and people in his dormitory also don't like it, which is why he might have to leave it here. In the study room, he studies all the subjects from different angles. He has to do this because if he loses even 1 credit in writing, he won't move up to the higher institute. All this hard work even gave Vil a white hair, which Colette really wants to pull out. Their noise is stopped by Edward. Edward tells Vil to come with him to the spell room, alone. With a big smile, Edward says he's giving Vil an extra lesson, just for him. He wants to find out Vil's future, but he's not sure if he'll succeed. Vil's task is to land a single hit on him. If Vil succeeds, Edward promises him 5 credits for spells. If he fails, he'll be kicked out of the academy. Will has no option to retreat. Will doesn't understand what's happening with him. Now, in parallel, we're shown the scene in the headmaster's office, where Professor Walkner is summoned. The headmaster uses his magic to show Professor Walkner, Professor Edwards and Will's fight. Upon seeing this, Professor Walkner is not happy at all. The headmaster says, "I'm not going to cancel this test. Just like I granted your request of allowing Will to study in this academy, Professor Edwards' request of testing Will is also allowed." Walkner asks headmaster, "You know that Professor Edward is closest to becoming a Magiavander. He has so much power that he can even defeat a Magiavander." On the other side, Professor Edward is near the fight with Will, where Professor Edward says to Will, "If you want to become a Magiavander, then you have to land a single strike on him." Will tries to land a hit at him, but Professor Edward is too strong for him. He tries to kick him but fails, due to a magical shield. Will thinks Professor is using their weak spells. Despite their weakness, these spells present a significant challenge for Will to dodge, leaving him injured and contemplating, "If only I had my sword with me." Will gets badly injured, and wounded Kiki escapes from there. Professor Edward tells Will to become a Magiavander. He must be capable of handling such situations. Will nods in acknowledgement. The professor uses his 2 spells, a fire flame spell and a shield spell, overlapping them multiple times to attack Vil effectively. Meanwhile, Colette sees injured Kiki near the cottage, trying to open Will's locker. Concerned about Kiki's condition, Colette asks if Will is in trouble. She shakes her head at Kiki's reply and mentions Will's magical abilities. Despite others doubting him, Will insists he will become a Magiavander. When captured, Edward tells Will about war between dwarfs and mages, where a single mage defeated 10,000 dwarf soldiers with his magic. Will, a non-magic user, challenges magician's abilities. Will confidently declares he will become a Magiavander, despite any challenges. He explains he made a promise to Elfaria that he intends to keep. He loves Elfaria and wants to stand beside her. Just then, Colette arrives and throws a sword towards Will. Will receives the sword, and puts on glasses given by Elfaria, transforming into a warrior. In the background, during the dwarfs' fight, their leader shows remarkable strength against a mage, eventually delivering a successful blow. Inspired by the dwarfs' leader's determination, Will breaks through a magic shield and prepares to attack. Suddenly, the professor aims his wand at Will, and Will points his sword at the professor. It seems Will might not land his attack, but then we see blood flowing from the professor's cheeks, indicating he's been injured. After that, Professor Edward gave Will 5 credit points and left. After the fight, Will was quite tired and fell asleep right there. On the other side, the Walkner and Headmaster praised Will for giving tough competition to the mage, despite not able to use any magic. If you like this video, please subscribe my YouTube channel.